House of Leaves needs no introduction, is what I would say if this wasn't one of the most confusing things I have ever read. Hello, and welcome back to HY Book Reviews. Now, before we get started, I want you to know beforehand that this book is not for the faint of heart in pretty much any single way, so if you are sensitive to a lot of content, you should not be reading this, and you also probably shouldn't be listening to this review as much as I appreciate the view. So, specifically, mostly it's about sex. I mean, you read the title, you should know that we're getting into some interesting territory today. So, let's get started. This is House of Leaves, written by Mark Z. Danielewski. It has become something of a small cultural phenomenon, and you can find references to it pretty much everywhere, but almost always, just out of sight. Most notably, it's about the spiral staircase, as you can maybe see if the lighting is kind. Yeah, there we go, the shell-looking thing in the middle. Which, if you don't know what that is, that just means you should read the book. There's even a famous mod for the video game Doom about this book, titled myhouse.wav. You may have heard of it from the YouTuber PowerPack, who called it Doom's most terrifying mod. Yeah, this is that story. Unlike most other reviews, I need to explain some things about this book, or not much I say will make much sense at all, but I still won't be spoiling anything. I don't even know if it's possible to spoil this book. House of Leaves is an example of ergodic literature. Ergodic literature is simply understood as literature which requires non-trivial effort from the reader to understand, which really just boils down to meaning anything where you don't just continue to read the next word after the next word sequentially like I'm doing for this script right now. This can be as simple, relatively speaking, as deciphering some hidden messages, but can get wildly complex. The most famous form of ergodic literature, which House of Leaves is known for, is using the physical space of the text on the page as part of the narrative, beyond the words themselves. Here's some examples from it, and don't worry if none of this really makes much sense. Oh, that would actually be upside down. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I think I'm actually going in reverse there. Let's see if, yeah, there's a lot of blank pages, a lot of wacky stuff that goes on in here. Every hallmark of ergodic literature is here, obviously making it very visually striking. But there's also plenty of hidden messages. A lot of times you'll have to flip around through the book, simultaneous writing which you have to parse through, and a whole lot more. The narrative structure also mirrors that of the physical structure. House of Leaves, sort of, and that sort of will make sense in a
Sorry.
and that sort of will make sense in a moment, follows who I call the main narrator, Johnny Truant. Johnny is basically commenting on and transcribing a documentary that an old, now dead, man was writing. The documentary is about another documentary known as the Navidson Record, and they share the same name. It follows the story of Will Navidson, a professional photographer who moves to the countryside with his family and, as a longer project, documents their life. He then discovers that the inside of his house is larger than the outside of his house, and it continues to devolve from there. The Navidson Record is ostensibly fake. According to Truant, it doesn't exist. The old man was creating a fake documentary on another fake documentary, including fake citations, fake interviews, and everything. Then if we go in the other direction, Truant has sent his copy and transcription to editors who have put in their own notes and information. That makes for 4 or so narrative folds, stories within stories, edits within edits, all happening at once. Understandably then, this is a very, very long work. It is, on its face, 709 pages long, which is already impressive, even more so given the dimensions of this thing. Which, now that you're getting a good look, isn't this beautiful? Again, if I can catch the light, yeah, if I can catch the light just right. And listen to this. Oh, that's nice. And it's pretty hefty, too. And although plenty of pages are blank, as you probably saw, unless I flipped to it too fast earlier, or at least partially filled, which does alleviate some time in the reading process, it is also very, very dense, and naturally you have to put in non-trivial effort to understand it, and that effort takes time. This is not a book you read in an afternoon. This is something you have to commit to, both temporally and mentally. And the single most shocking thing for me is that this is a debut novel. Danielewski published this thing before any other book, though he does now have more recent works, such as the Familiar series. And let me tell you, he cooked, and he cooked hard. Now you might be wondering just what I mean by the title of this video. Definitely eye-catching. I hope so. I need those algorithm clicks, which means it's a good time to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It doesn't help me financially, but I do get a hit of dopamine every time I see those numbers go up, and that's good enough. It really does help with wanting to keep making these. Now, what I mean by the title is, well, a few things. Let's get into it. House of Leaves is masturbatory. This was the thought I had shooting through my mind at so many different times for so many different reasons throughout my reading of this book. This word means, of course, a few different things, and I think all of them are true for one reason or another. The most immediate way to frame this would be all of the sex and horny posting the book does. It just does not shut up about sex and one-night stands and people's bodies and whatever. The main narrator will not stop horny posting on Maine. And you know, I like to think I'm not a prude. I actually really don't mind this as much as other commentators I've seen around. But it is still shocking, the sheer volume of content dedicated to this topic, describing the actions in explicit details. You can take snippets from this book and these sections and place them in the middle of an erotica novel, and the audience would be none the wiser. At the same time, you can take a section of an erotica novel and place it in here, and we probably wouldn't notice, obviously ignoring syntactical and vernacular differences. And I'll go to bat for this decision, actually. I do believe that the prevalence is overall unnecessary, and that the book would have been better had it been toned down in frequency. But I understand the novel not just as a masterclass in the burgeoning ergodic literature, and some might say a masterclass in horror, but an examination of every part of the human experience. It is simply undeniable that a thorough examination of our life is woefully incomplete without also examining our relationship to others, both romantically and perhaps especially sexually, and how our sexual relations with others shape and are shaped by the life we live, the feelings we express and those we keep to ourselves, and even our view of reality itself. Danielewski is not afraid or self-conscious of exploring these topics, exploring the whole view of life, even in often crass ways. I think the book as literature is better for it, even if it pretty much guarantees a narrower audience, which could stand to read it all. And then again, I don't think such a work needed to worry about a narrow audience in the first place. That was pretty much inevitable. In another sense of the word, House of Leaves is masturbatory because it is self-indulgent. The entire narrative, and even the physical structure of the words we read and the order in which we read them, not syntactically, but how they appear on paper and in ink, is constructed in such a particular way that the author is allowed and even expected to talk about anything and everything and to do whatever he wants. Danielewski in this book is self-indulgent of all the things every author wants to do and never has a good chance to. In this one novel, he gets to invoke the supernatural, the incomprehensible, and give it such characteristics that he never needs to explain it, that he never needs to set down ground rules, so that he can make it do whatever the plot demands, ultimately without fundamentally altering the world around the characters or the real world. At the same time, the real world is irrevocably altered through the perspective of the main character, and the character set within the fake documentary of the story, and thus the audience is forced to ask what is real and what is not. Additionally, the author can make and hide a wide array of hidden messages in many formats, and if you've ever written any sort of fiction, I'd call you a liar if you said you hadn't thought about doing that at one point. He can explore so many varieties of philosophical intrigue, be as pretentious with verbiage and grammar as he wishes, and even has the benefit of being able to explicitly call out said pretentiousness, such as on page 127, and lampshade it through another fold in the narrative. Knowledge about fields from architecture and politics and linguistics and literature all get to be espoused and explored and laid bare. References to famous works and more references to not so famous works, and the ability to just make up whatever he wants while framing it as a plot point within the very work itself that these references are all made up. In no other horror book have I seen it acceptable to go on multi-page exposés about math equations, and in here it all serves the narrative folds it's within. I mean, that is unless you consider a math textbook to be horror, which I know some of you do. And that's fine. Personally, I'm scared of geography. Danielewski also gets to self-indulge in genre and style here too. From pure analytical philosophy to the obvious horror, to a compendium of poetry, short story intrigue, faux nonfiction, actual nonfiction, also obviously a whole documentary, and all the while wrapping everything up, tying up loose ends within each other, and then shredding it all to ribbons and cutting the tape and letting the audience pick up the pieces. It is self-indulgent, and I love it for that. House of Leaves really is an exploration of everything a brilliant writer can do all at once, whether it makes sense or not, and somehow make it all work in the end. The third and final way I think of the word masturbatory is, very literally, playing with yourself. Duh. I can't find a more fitting description for this book. Again, I will hammer home, this is ergodic literature. It is defined by non-trivial effort to understand the text. In House of Leaves, this comes through as hidden messages, skipping ahead and back to various parts of the book, understanding the work through layers and layers of narrative folds, and very often simultaneously, and the complete distortion of the physical space of the text to match in-universe events, or sometimes just to be weird, it seems, though I do doubt much of this was ever truly unintentional. The book plays with its narrative by putting a fake story inside of a fake documentary, inside of another fake documentary, inside of a dead man's physical writing, inside of a transcriber's decay of mind, in the context of an edited book sent to the editors by the in-universe main narrator. It plays with the physical space it occupies, words melting into and covering others, holes torn through the pages, words and sentences arranging themselves in shapes as a sword, every instance of the word house in English or otherwise being colored blue, as you can see on the title itself, if I could rotate it correctly. The very index containing words that don't appear in the book and are therefore marked NA. It plays with its own plot, never fully letting on what is real and what is not, given to us by an unreliable narrator, jumping back and forth, hinting that something greater is taking place while telling us everything is fine, then in the next moment hinting that everything is fine while telling us that something greater is taking place. It plays with its own audience, and I will contend that we, as the audience, as the reader, our experience and our perception of the book itself is an integral part of the book. No experience with this thing is the same. I am sure that, to anyone who has read this before, I need not elaborate. And I am sure that, to anyone who has not read this before, no amount of elaboration can make up for that vital lack of experience. It plays with its own characters, too, putting them through distress after distress through the mechanism of the author in the book. There is a picture at the end where we can see, in relation to one of the multiple climaxes of the book, both literally and literaturally, the author of the fake documentary in a bout of anger describing how he should, within the context of his fake documentary, kill the children and make the main character suffer. Nothing is sacred here. Nothing is real, or everything is real, or it really doesn't matter. And really quick, on the topic of images in the back, yeah, it is in color. I mean, there's not a lot of pictures, if I could get to them at all. Like here. And that's really cool. I really appreciate that. House of Leaves plays with itself in a much more meta sense as well. It makes an appearance in its own book, twice, actually, which were both jaw-dropping moments for me when reading. And it references itself and its origin as a collection of notes and then an online work before a publishing company took a chance. It intrudes upon its own story. further emphasizing a supposed connection to the real world and yet again calling into question everything we had assumed about the project. But Masturbatory is not all House of Leaves is. Genre-wise, it is of course a lot of things, but most frequently it will be described as horror. This, I believe, is a very apt description. It is not necessarily fear-inducing as we commonly think of horror, at least not for myself, though I understand we all have our own monster we think of in the dark, and this book very well may be the dark. But it is horrific. It is, on the lowest narrative fold, a story of a deep, deep physical and mental disturbance encroaching on a family who has done nothing to warrant it. On higher levels, it plays with the horror of monsters, the horror of mysterious and otherworldly forces, the horror of going mad, and perhaps most strikingly, the horror of never knowing you've gone mad until it might be too late. House of Leaves has also been talked about as a postmodernist and metafictional. It is these two also. It deals heavily in themes of textuality, the unreliable narrator, subjectivity, and the unknowableness of the outer world from our inner world perspective. It does this throughout the more grounded but no less important themes of family, love, loss, fear of the unknown, overcoming your fears, the conflict between dreams and idealism and the demands of the real world, and the slow erosion of love, and more. It's also just frankly brilliant in its writing and absurd at times. There are many lines and sentences which are beautifully written, such as indicated by my green marks I have going on, a reluctant Eve who prefers tangerines to apples. A brief instant of communion, possessing me with warmth and ageless ease, causing me to smile again and relax as if memory alone could lift the heart like the wind lifts a wing. Until suddenly, my eyes on their own accord, commanded by instincts darker and older than empathy or anything resembling emotional need. Any fool can pray. Prometheus, thief of light, giver of light, bound by the gods, must have been a book. And of course, the worst of all, leaving behind someone who wasn't a friend, but might have become one. And there's one more here that I'll read as well. I mean, even if you could connect those dots, which I don't think you can, what kind of picture would you really draw? Do you want to know what the next line is? The very next sentence after that stunningly poetically quote? It's, "There was something about her pussy." The juxtaposition and contrast lends itself well to incredulity. There are many jaw-dropping moments in my reading, and from many such a variety of sources. It really does pick at every single emotion available, from terror to lust to sheer disbelief. It is one giant mess from start to finish. The first line of this book is, "This is not for you." The last is either, "Oh," just "oh," or "its roots must hold the sky," depending on interpretation. At no point in between these lines was I prepared for what was to come next. And I mentioned in my notes of this, and I said that I was not prepared for this book, either as a reader or a writer, and I still believe that to be true. I for sure wasn't prepared for the much heavier elements and scenes, the depth of loss and pain and grief and madness. But it wasn't a perfect piece. And I think this might be my most controversial position on this book. I don't think it went far enough. I wanted the pages to feel like they were alive and that the words themselves were crawling to me, through me, and that the entire book was changing and morphing not just as some literary trick as is the Watsonian explanation, but as something preternatural that would make me question not just the reality presented within each and every narrative fold, but the narrative fold of my own life. Now, I don't know if it was ever intended to be that way. It might have, it might not have, but its reputation was definitely that. So when I went in, that's what I was expecting. And there's a very valid point to be made that expecting something from a piece of literature that only its fans have promised and not it itself has promised isn't very fair as a criticism of the work itself. And you'd be right if you're thinking that. But that's not my point here. Rather, I believe that from everything I was given from the book itself, there was a lot of room to play so much more with such a rare opportunity to publish something as fundamentally unique as this, and it wasn't taken. I did not really like the Watsonian explanation for this style, or at least, despite it being very cool conceptually, I don't like it being applied to everything. Well, not everything, but enough for me to ultimately be a little disappointed by its execution. But a little is not a lot. I love this book anyway. It is so beautiful, heavy, striking, and overall so much of it is what I aspire to do and to be as a writer myself. Yes, it is masturbatory, and that in every sense of a word is a compliment. Or really just an accurate description. In any case, I will handily give House of Leaves a 9.2 out of 10. It is not perfect, it leaves a fair bit to be desired by its premise, and so it isn't one of my top 5 books or anything, but it is by far one of my favorites. There will, for anyone interested, be a link to a free online PDF copy of this book for everyone to access in the description below. However, I don't recommend this. Although it is obviously the cheaper option, I believe looking at a screen and not feeling the heft and the dimensions of it all, seeing the words bend across the pages, and not even being able to smell it, it all detracts from the experience. As I said, the audience experience is part of the story too. I have to recommend getting a physical copy of this book, and so a link from Barnes & Noble for this edition will also be available, but of course, both are provided for convenience. I think that's all I really have to say about this book. I hope the title wasn't clickbaity. I hope I did it justice for such a phrase. I don't know, trying out a sort of new style for these reviews, so I hope that went well. Again, if you enjoyed the video or the channel or really anything, I would appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe. It, like I said, it does help. And I will hopefully be back next week. I don't know what I'm going to cover, but I guess by then you'll find out. So until then, this has been H-Way Book Reviews. Keep on reading.
Bye. Goodbye.
Oh, wrong button.